Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Best Practices. I'm joined once again by Samantha Toth. She is the president and founder of InnerReactive. Welcome back, Samantha.
Thanks, Steve.
Pleasure to have you again. I'm super excited for this chat. Last time we spoke about best practices for company culture. Today, we're going to talk about best practices for creating wow moments for your patients and customers. Which I think is, we were talking about this before we started recording, something that isn't discussed enough. So what is a wow moment? What does that even look like?
Ooh, it doesn't matter where I'm at on a speaking tour in the country, that if I ask independent eye care professionals specifically, what is it that separates you from your competition? Almost every time the number one answer, someone will say, well, we offer great customer service, Sam. Okay, well, but the question really is bigger than that. Then my follow-up to that is, well, how do you define customer service? And that's when everybody kind of pauses. And it's like, well, we don't make them feel like a number. Okay, well, let's talk about it even further. You pretend to be that like 5-year-old kid that keeps saying, well, why? Well, why? Well, why? And really what it is a wow moment is when you do something that's so remarkable, that was so, a delightful surprise, that it stops a patient in their tracks so that they pause and makes them want to say, if they don't say, wow, that it was unexpected and it was something that more than likely they're going to go home and tell a friend or a family member about. And at the end of the day, the number one most powerful form of marketing is word of mouth.
And if nothing else, word of mouth has only gotten more powerful since the advent of social media. There was like a marketing adage that used to say, like, if somebody has a good experience, they'll tell 4 people. And if they have a bad experience, they'll tell 9 or something like that. But now if they've got a good experience, they'll tell 40 people. And if they got a bad experience, they'll tell 900.
Yeah. I mean, really, between Google and Yelp and insert review platform here and social media, it's really just word of mouth on digital steroids.
Yeah, exactly that. And as you're talking about this, I'm thinking through, like, when I was in practice as an optician, what did I do to create those wow moments? And the things that I'm kind of rattling off in my head were like the lowest hanging fruit there was doing the things that my competitors, the big box retailers, couldn't or wouldn't do. Ordering a new color for a frame just for a patient to try on. That's a big service thing that patients don't really expect these days. It takes a little bit longer, but they love it. Those custom things. I also had I have a pretty good memory for glasses. I don't remember faces super well, but I remember glasses on faces really well. So when I see somebody coming in with that, I'm like, oh, hey, Mr. Jones, welcome back. And that always excites people, and those kinds of things. But I suspect there are much more structural things you can do to ensure wow moments are created every day.
Yeah, I mean, when you really think about what goes into patient experience, it's important to really think about success. No longer just comes from providing a great customer experience, right? It's about engineering an entire planned patient experience throughout their journey. And when we break down, one of the things that I love to do is really break down the patient journey into a number of different kind of key checkpoints. And just off the top of my head, when you think of like the discovery phase before the patients even come into the practice, moving into pre-visit before when they've decided to make an appointment, but they haven't yet come in, and then intake to pre-testing to the exam. I mean, you can go through and literally draw an entire checkpoint of the patient journey. And when you do that, when you look at each individual spot in that journey and you start to engineer an experience, like, what can I do here throughout their journey to really create a wow moment, to bring them something that was unexpected that will make them happy. That's where you start to really create a dynamic experience for the patient.
And something memorable. I think the point that you made earlier, super important, that they'll leave your office and have to go and tell somebody. Like it's so impactful on them that they can't help but share that experience. And I think
Yeah.
the engineering the experience is really important. The way that I kind of construct it in my head is choice architecture. It is building the choices from which your customers can choose. So it happens on the frame board. It happens with the services that you offer. It happens with the contact lenses that you prescribe. It happens with the people you employ and the availability of scheduling an appointment. Like, you know, if I go on a website today, if I need to see a doctor, and if I have to call to make an appointment, I'm less wowed than I would be if I could just do it in the moment when I have my schedule in front of me and I don't have to bother anybody. And I know that's just my mindset. Not everybody is that way, but the more options like that you give to your prospective patients and customers, the more likely it is that you're going to wow them in their particular way.
100%. And I think, Steve, you brought up an important point, is that when you said for me, right? And we talk about, and one of the things as independents, and what we pride ourselves in the most is that we don't treat patients like a number. And then we also need to understand and respect that many of our patients are different and may want to communicate and interact with us differently. And so we need to figure out how can we provide them the best experience across the patient, across their journey, even though they may want to interact with us in different ways throughout the journey. And they may find value in certain things that others don't along the way. Whereas you may want to text or schedule online, another person may find a hassle because they want to, they want to talk to a person. And I think that really gets into patients expect more than just great service, right? They expect to feel seen, they expect to feel valued, and they expect to feel cared for at every single step. And that's really gotten complicated. And how do we do that in eye care in this space at a time that, shoot, like 2019, like right before COVID, it was all about text, email, digital, be more efficient. You can do all of these things. But then it was like, boom, we hit the COVID wall of 2020, right? And then everybody slowed down and stopped. And I think that was such a pivotal moment in terms of not just eye care, but any industry, of it's not just about efficiency. And I almost feel like and that was a time that we realized as consumers across industries that the experience is now more important than ever before. And there's a time and a place for efficiency and texts and push this button. But now the humanization side of the experience is more important than ever before.
I couldn't agree more. This all reminds me of a conversation I had with my now wife when we were first dating. I would talk about how important it was for me to be efficient in my day to day. And my wife, in her way, says, yeah, I mean, efficiency is cool, but have you tried efficacy? And then I had to pause and think. I'm like, man, what an interesting perspective. So like I could do stuff quickly and that's great, but what if I did it the way that is most effective in this moment, in this situation? Maybe it'll take me a little bit longer, but the results will be better. And efficiency always directs you to fast. Efficacy always directs you to better.
100%. I mean, when you think about patient experience, wowing a patient, when you wow a patient, you don't just get the word of mouth referral and a new one comes in. You build loyalty. Like that patient's going to come back because they feel valued, they feel heard, they feel seen. It's going to drive the word of mouth, but it's also going to increase capture rate, because if they feel seen, they don't want to take their business anywhere else. They trust you and they want to be a part of it. Like, what are they going to do next? What are they going to do next to surprise me? And that's the idea, is how can we create and engineer that experience throughout patient checkpoints? And hope we can talk about that more today, that's going to differentiate the practice from a crowded market.
And I think it's a vital conversation to sort of crystallize what those things are. So I'll happy to take your lead in how to have this conversation. My head goes to like department by department as you see the patient go around the office, but maybe there's a better way to conceptualize this.
I think it's important kind of first because I've already been doing this is kind of using the term customer service and customer experience interchangeably. And I think it's important to really just create a base understanding of what is the difference between the two, right? Customer service is an example, I guess, to like give an example of customer service. Customer service is very reactive. It's very, it's very company centric. It'd be like the patient calls to ask if their glasses are ready. Your optician checks the status, updates them, and then offers to send them a text when they arrive. Like they could do that with a big smile on their face. It could be the most polite call. You can do that, but it's very much transactional, right? It's a short-term solution. It's reactive. There wasn't anything, even if the person was very nice, there wasn't anything that was like, "Ooh, blow my hair back," right? A customer experience is when the patient, what they feel kind of before, during, after. It's putting the customer at the center. So how can we blow their mind before they how can we give them what they need before they knew they needed it? Let me say that one more time. How can we wow the customer in a customer experience? How can we wow the customer in a way that we surprise them with the information they needed it before they knew they needed it? Being proactive in a journey-based engineered experience, because you know where they're going to go. So let's anticipate what their expectations are going to be. And instead of just meeting the expectations, let's find ways to exceed them based on what we know is important to them.
And I know this approach plays into having a strong company culture because that kind of proactive approach only exists when the individuals in a practice take ownership of what they're doing, right? It has to matter to them to deliver something like this. But let's assume.
Yeah, no one walked into it. Sorry,
No,
go
no,
ahead.
please.
No one walked into a practice and said, "Wow, that was an amazing experience, but man, the people working there were miserable."
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right. And I've heard one of the best compliments I've ever received when I was an optician was a patient would come in and they would see that I was busy and we had another optician available and they'd offer to help and they say, no, I'll wait for Steve. That, to your point about building loyalty and trust and that being a valuable thing. Now, there's a give and a take with that. The other optician also very talented, and I want them to be able to work for that. But that trust building is something that I think is a lot undervalued. Actually, a lot of conversations that I have with practices are saying that patients aren't loyal to a practice, and there's a correlation between the practice owners who say that and the practice owners who don't deliver this kind of wow experience that you're describing. The business owners who say their customers aren't loyal are right, but they're diagnosing the wrong reason why.
That's huge. I love that. You should quote yourself somewhere on that. That's a great point. Yeah, and when you think about that, I mean, to the listeners of this podcast, I mean, it's very easy to fall into a groove, right? When you've owned a business for 20 some years, that consistency, predictability, that repetition, those are the things for years that have made companies successful. But when you start to think about the way that the industry is changing and how, and paying attention to what consumer expectations are doing, consumer expectations are changing now. And when we think about, are we changing the approach to how we're running our businesses and the approach to what we're providing as part of that experience to meet those new expectations? Or are we still doing it the same way we've practiced for the last 20 years?
And it's a difficult question to answer honestly, right? If you, because to your point, when you talk to a practice owner, a manager, optician, when you say like, well, what do you do that sets you apart? The answers are actually really similar, but similarly vague. We offer excellent products. I'm like, well, so does every practice. We offer great customer service. Every practice says that. We've got awesome technology. Yeah, every practice says that too. But why you? Why now? And why will your patients come back? Boy, are those questions much more difficult to answer.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about some of the questions that you might even ask a patient, um, what's your favorite thing about coming to this? Why do you come back every year? What's your favorite thing about coming to this practice? And I guarantee that it's not, you offer great customer service. And if that is the answer, then what is it specifically about your experience? Where did someone blow your mind with the customer service? What did they do that made you feel great? So like really mining that question. But to your point is in most practices, the answers that you get was exemplified by the example you gave is I'm willing to wait longer for Steve. When you ask, well, what's the reason you come back? It's because I love Dr. Smith because I feel like I get a really good eye exam and I know that when I work with Steve afterwards that I'm going to leave here looking like $1,000,000 and I get so many compliments on my glasses and I trust Steve to pick out my next pair. That it usually ties back to the people, right? It's the people that are the most important part of the patient experience.
I couldn't agree more. And I've made sort of a habit of saying you don't work with companies, you work with people who work for companies. And the people that you hire, like in your practice, those of you listening, the people that you hire to communicate with your patients digitally over the phone or in person are a representative of your practice. And often they have a much higher impact on how your patient feels about your practice than the optometrist does. They spend more time talking to the front desk to book or talking to the optician to get their glasses made or talking to the technician getting worked up than they do in most optometry exam chairs. And that's especially true if you're a high volume vision plan practice. If you're seeing 40 patients a day, there is no circumstance where a practicing 40 patients a day is offering a higher quality experience than a practicing 20 patients a day. It just, the math doesn't work. It can't.
Quantity is not equal quality.
Right. They have kind of an inverse relationship in this case. Because to your point, I love the exam that Dr. Smith gives me. He makes me feel like I matter and he remembers what's going on and pays attention to what I'm saying. That's an invaluable thing. I'm going to take a quick sidestep here just to talk about generations for a moment. So I'm an elder millennial. And in my time, going from, child optician to adult sort of now, I've noticed some big changes in just what's available in a given market, like a physical geographic space. Like when I was a kid, there were no butcher shops. There were supermarkets where you could buy meat. There were like Supercuts and Bowricks or whatever, but there was no like single barber shop where just like a barber existed as an expert. There are cocktail bars now that exist where mixologists are able to ply their trade because they make a good, careful drink as opposed to what you can get at any bar anywhere. And why I bring all that up is that people love expertise. They seek it in basically everything. If you think about and I don't have a lot of experience with this, obviously, but you go to a hairdresser, ladies go to a hairdresser several times a month in some cases, a couple times a month, or, whatever, way more frequently than they go to an eye doctor. But you're talking hundreds of dollars every time. And their customers pay it happily because it's part of their image and they've built trust with that person. It is much more difficult to do that when you're churning 40 patients a day and when you don't have the opportunity to show your expertise. And certainly you can't wow patients at that pace.
100%. And I think it brings it back to really understanding who are the main patient segments. Who are the main patient segments in your practice? I call this process customer typing. And when you understand their values, their fears, their preferences, and you tailor those experiences to meet their needs, which you perfectly just described through your examples of the mixologist and the butcher shop. And, you're able to tailor experiences and specialize and personalize those experiences because patients aren't a one size fits all either. So, a great experience to one patient type might feel completely unnecessary or unimportant to another. So the great question is in this, how do we design these wow moments? How do we do so in a practice that you have elder millennials, you have boomers, you have Gen Z, and you have all these different age groups who have different expectations. How do we find a way, and throughout the patient journey, how do we find a way to not just meet but exceed those patient expectations, across the way? And I'd love to walk down that path.
Yeah, I would love to. I think it's so important, and as a baseline of understanding that in order to deliver these things, you have to think about these things. You have to understand your demographics. You have to understand what your team can deliver, and you have to understand how. And you've got to build the process to do that. So, let's say before the patient comes in, right? How do you build what needs to be there in order to build that wow experience? So your web presence, how do you communicate with them online? What are best practices for setting yourself up for success in that way?
The most common patients that we've all seen in our practices, right? We've got our fashion forward shopper that they want the most unique styles. They're looking for the latest trends, exclusive collections. Like, these are the people who, the fashionistas, if you will. We've got our value focused patients. They've got they seek affordability, promotions, whatever, show me your collections that are on sale. You've got your tech savvy professions. Maybe they're engineers or developers. They run a podcast. But they want convenience. They want speed. They're about efficiency and efficacy, advanced technology. And then you've got your loyal long timer who's trust your recommendations, prioritizes relationships over price, will trust, anything you say, Steve, is what I'm going to do. Right. So I think if we kind of just start with these patients in our mind, now, how do we go through the patient journey and make all of these people happy? Like, how do we still exceed their expectations, have a mind-blowing experience, but try to do so based on what's important to each of those? And I think if we kind of start to step through a couple parts of the patient journey, and maybe if it's okay with you, we can identify what's important at each of the journey that we do to kind of form an experience, but also what are some of the common pitfalls that maybe some of your listeners might identify with, or red flags that there's area for improvement. And then we can talk about, like, hey, what are some break the script strategies? If I was willing to do something completely different, like, what are some things that maybe I could walk away from this podcast knowing how to do and start implementing it tomorrow?
That's excellent. I love that idea.
Okay, awesome. So to your point about, I guess, what I'll call the discovery phase is the patient hasn't made an appointment and they're deciding and they're kind of shopping around, if you will. This is the part where whatever it is that we have on our website, social media, Google reviews, in many cases now, like, people aren't pulling out the yellow pages anymore, calling around to the first practice that starts with letter A, then letter B, right? Like, that's not how it works anymore. Is they're going to your website and they're reading these things, and oftentimes they're never even picking up the phone. So their first impression of the practice is often a digital one, and it has to do with the digital footprint. So we've got to start thinking about, is the first impression that they're going to get positive? Is it engaging? Or are we just talking about, we do eye exams, so does everybody else? Is it about quality? So does everybody else. Is it about our great customer service? So is everybody else. So I guess I would say common pitfalls: outdated website. If it's talking about only those things, these are the insurances we accepted front and foremost. Like that's, again, not a differentiator. Inconsistent branding, stretched logos, all that kind of generic photography. Oh my goodness, stop using stock photos, take pictures of your team. We just spent, all this time already talking about people are the reason that people are your brand. Stop using stock photos. and making sure that all of the profiles that people might search, if it's Google or Yelp or whatever, that all of those are updated. That's just kind of a basic foundation in Pitfalls.
I would
When
call
that
out
stuff's out there.
it specifically. Google, you may have noticed if you're listening, Google's made some changes to what happens to your general search results. If you just Google like eye doctor near me, the first thing that'll pop up is an AI overview, and then off to the side will be a pre-selected menu of a couple of local businesses, mostly sponsored. So there will be like a Google My Business situation that shows up before they even see your website. So to that exact point, Samantha, is make sure your Yelp profile is up to date. Make sure your Google profile is the brand that you want to present, because a lot of folks will just dismiss your website entirely if it doesn't look appealing. Please carry on. Sorry.
And just to piggyback on that, when we talk about break the script strategies of let's do something different, that's not a set it and forget it. Like I'm going to go check out my Google profile and it looks good today, so now I'm going to, not revisit it for another 3-4 years. I encourage update your photos every month, come up with new ones, share what you're doing. Use the posts to share features, event specials, patient success story, special office hours because of the holidays. When people are posting reviews, whether they're positive or negative, a lot of times we just think to reply to the negative reviews. But if someone pays you a compliment in person, what do? You turn around and say, hey, thanks. Social media is social on media. We should be doing the same thing, right? Other break the script strategies during that kind of discovery portion is they really focusing on that website content. Include a why we do what we do. Why do we do this? Why do we care? Purpose. We talked about purpose, value, and core values as it relates to, creating great company culture. Why don't we do the same thing of, why we do what we do and why you should come here versus a competition? Why not just say that? Quality, service, and speed should be assumed. Let's talk about the cool stuff we're doing that nobody else is doing. So I think that that's important. And two, just visual messaging and consistency, and having a message that resonates with those customer types that we talked about. So specifically, when we're talking about that fashion forward shopper, having some pages on your site that talk about exclusive frame drops, and maybe having Instagram stories specifically that are targeted to a specific line or exclusive collection. When you start getting into value focused, making sure that you have content on your site talking about promotions or family deals or things like that.
It's vitally important, I think, as you identify your like patient types or your likely patient demographics. For the fashion forward folks, a lot of websites in the market today have a page that has the logos of the frames that they carry, and those logos, by and large, link off to that designer's website. One, what are you doing? They're on your website. Why would you send them anywhere else? Two, the people who are interested in those brands know those brands. They can find that website on their own. Like, they don't need your help finding Dior's website. No shade to Dior or anything, but like, they don't need your help finding that website. But if you want to feature the fashion forward collections that you have, talk to your patients who wear them. Take a picture of them and feature them like a real person in a real frame that they really bought in your practice. To your point about staff, the staff gets new glasses, at least in my experience working with opticians, they get new glasses all the time and they love sharing their new glasses. Set up a selfie station somewhere where it's a nice looking photo and share that. It's so different than just, to your point, generic pictures that could be any practice or anybody behind a phoropter. That doesn't do anything for anybody. But somebody looking thrilled in your practice with the pair of glasses they got from your practice, that tells a story.
100%. And I think not to just skip ahead from the website to the optical, but that's typically where, the optical experience is where the patient perception really meets your most profitable products of a practice, right? I mean, it's where the highest revenue stage, where the wow moments really have the biggest financial impact on a practice. And when, we kind of think about the interaction that the patient's going to have in this part of the practice can either confirm the value of your recommendations, or it can undermine them. So this is really important that the patient has a positive experience, and we really blow their mind here in order to increase our capture rate and to blow their mind in terms of service expectations. Common pitfalls in the optical, right? So if we have our listeners, if anybody can relate to this, where the staff focuses too much on insurance coverage rather than on patient needs. I can tell you, I'm a certified optician. I was trained to walk in with the VSP authorization benefits forms and, hi, my name's Samantha. I'm going to work with you today. I can let you know I've gone through, I understand your insurance coverage, your VSP, IMED, whatever, you've got coverage for basic coverage on lenses. You've got a frame up to $140, anything above, $440, and the routine, right? But then as an optician, we get so frustrated that our patients immediately go to price when we started it, and we didn't even realize we started the conversation about the price. So that's a number one, huge common pitfall that we've just got to recognize and stop doing it. 2, frames that are displayed in our opticals with very little intention, very little curation, making that process feel overwhelming without guided recommendations. When we leave a patient unattended for too long, reducing momentum, they don't feel like it's a guided experience. Or if the focus is too much on features and price, not on lifestyle or outcome, a personal style or an emotional connection to something that they've shared is important to the patient. If it feels like a sales zone rather than a eye care experience. And then 2, lack of prescription or lack of engagement where the patient just says, I'll take my prescription and go. Those are some real common pitfalls that I hear in talking with practice owners and opticians around the country.
Absolutely right. And in those circumstances, I want to start at the last thing that you said and kind of work backwards. When somebody says, I just want to take my prescription and go, the reactions are pretty consistent from opticians. They sink. They get a little huffy, and I don't take shots at opticians, but it makes sense, right? This is an opportunity to take care of a patient, and they're dismissing it out of hand. But often they're resigned. They give the prescription and kind of end the conversation there instead of asking questions, instead of saying well, have you had a chance to look around at our frames? Or the doctor did give you a new prescription and he or she gave me these recommendations for you. I'd love to talk with you about them before you go. Whether you get our glasses from us or not, you are our patient and I want to make sure you're taken care of. Instead of just saying, here it is, now go. That is a huge miss for any number of reasons. Because a lot of the patients who want their prescription to go, and I can't obviously guess at their actual motivations, but a lot of them presume that they can get glasses cheaper elsewhere. And that may in fact be true. It may not be. It's not always true. Online isn't guaranteed to be less expensive. But also patients don't know what we know about optical. They don't know what they're missing by going somewhere else. And whether you close the sale or not, this is an opportunity for you to educate them on what you do and why it matters. If you don't do that in that circumstance, you are not just losing that sale, you're losing that patient kind of forever. And a hugely invaluable pitfall to recognize. And then later, if your team goes through and reviews the data and says, hey, our capture rate was only 35%. Why? Nobody knows why, because nobody asked any questions. and
Right.
What are you going to do then?
There's so much we can do to meet expectations, right? But then how do we, and this is the part that I love about really engineering the patient experience, is what can we do to break the script, to create that wow moment, to surprise that patient with something they haven't experienced shopping for eyewear before, and something that they're not going to get anywhere else. Again, quality, service, speed assumed. So, when you make it more about the experience and less about a transaction, there's a lot of very basic things that we could talk about today, which is, the verbiage that you use, using, greeting patients by name, offering to store their belongings. Think of some of the places that you go shopping in luxury stores. The first thing they do when they walk in is offer you a beverage, and having some opportunities. I mean, it could just be subtle things, like things that make people feel like they're in a, in a safe, comfortable space and they want to stay and hang out. Don't need to be expensive. But also it leads into intentionally displaying products, like maybe consider grouping frames into lifestyle or look collections, such as weekend casual, professional power, outdoor adventure, some of those kind of things. If you've got a following of people who love Optician Steve, maybe Steve has a curated collection of all of his favorite frames, and that's one that you just make sure that your top sellers are always in there because they're your go-to. And maybe that changes, and maybe every optician has their own section.
One like really important point here, a lot of opticals are designed to be entered from two directions, right? To be entered from the front door and then to be entered from the back after the exam is over. Not every optical is that way, but it is really common. But you take a walk from the exam lane to the optical, and when you look in there, in most cases, I'm looking at the side of a display case. I'm not looking at anything interesting. If I'm looking at the side of a display case, I kind of want to leave. I get it. Think about the first thing your patient sees when they walk into your optical. That is the very basics of merchandising. You want it to be appealing. You want them to stay. If it feels like they're coming in a back entrance, they're not going to love it.
No. And not does it look and feel like a place I want to stay? And what's the story behind it? So many times that we pull something off, and opticians, and I'm sure many of the opticians on this podcast, listening to this podcast, are like, they can look at a patient, see their face shape, just analyze that and just know right exactly where those frames are located, put them on that face, and they're going to walk out with one of those 5 frames. But it's different when you take a frame off the board and you look down at the frame and you say, this is one of my favorites. Let me tell you a little bit about this frame before you hand it to them even. And then you talk about what goes into the frame, where it was made, the type of materials that goes in, that it was made with, the number of hands that have touched this frame, the type of design, what these mean. So many of the practice, we've got incredible frame lines and designers that we're not even talking about. We're taking them off, we're putting them on faces. And are we taking the time to explain why you're not just recommending it, but talk about what goes in? Because now all of a sudden, when you pass with 2 hands, you pass that frame to the patient and they put it on their face, it feels different. It's got a story behind it. There's a connection to it. It's not just a piece of plastic or a piece of metal that is covered by your insurance.
I find it so difficult to believe that this is something that is so rare, but the brands that you carry are reflective of who you are as a business, certainly. And if you're able to tell that story in a way that your patient understands, it'll lead to loyalty and wow moments and everything we've been discussing so far. But it also answers the question of price in a lot of ways, right? Like your patient comes in and many patients come in and think the optical's too expensive for me, and they want their prescription and they go, and then they leave with it. But if you do what you're describing and you say, this is Mazzucchelli acetate imported from Italy and then manufactured right here in the States, patients will appreciate that and they'll understand Italian product manufactured in America. Okay. I expect this to be more expensive than something made in China. Cool. Like there's a logic to it. Even if they're not fashion forward, they can do some basic understanding. And once you're able to tell that story once or twice, you don't have to tell that story for every single frame. The patient hears your expertise and then just assumes it for the rest of the transaction.
Yeah, and tying it back to their specific needs, right? If they talked about how they're a cyclist and they're competing and they ride on the weekends and they're competing in this long distance, or they're a triathlete, or they hike, or they knit, or they crochet, or when you talk about whether it's the frame, whether it's the lens and how this lens is going to help them perform that task better. And it's less about the features and the technology, and it's more about the outcome-based solution. It really changes it really changes the approach.
Absolutely. I think I'm a bit obsessed with language. I think the words you select, the way you describe something is typically an indication of how you feel about that thing. And if it's something you're introduced to for the first time, the way you're introduced to it actually has a huge impact in how you feel about it going forward. There's a psychological concept called anchoring, right? And it's certainly related to merchandising. If a patient comes into your optical and the first frame you give them is $100 and the second frame you give them is $700, are they going to buy that $700 frame? Absolutely not. There's no way that's happening because suddenly it's $600 more than the first thing that I got. But if you have them a $700 frame and then an $800 frame, or a $300 frame and a $400 frame, the gap isn't as big and it isn't so jarring, and you're not disqualifying them from purchasing any of those things. And it's these like little psychological things that I think are often missed, but make a huge impact on how your patient certainly chooses what they're going to get, but how they feel about it that whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. I I'm thinking too, like when we kind of go back to that connection too, is, we think about in the optical is how do we continue to tie back to who that customer type was, whether it's the fashion forward shopper of making sure that we're not leading with what their insurance will cover. We're leading with a designer or a limited edition frame or shared styling tips. And how do we know that this is a fashionista patient or a fashion forward patient is we need to have asked the questions to allow us to get to know them to get there, right? Like we need to have made that part of the fashion journey or part of the patient journey to understand kind of what are our main types and where do we see them falling into to know how we lead. Value focused patient on the optical is we may lead with making sure that we're focusing on bundled savings, durable classics, maybe a satisfaction guarantee is going to be more important for them. Whereas more of a tech savvy, maybe we are going to spend a little bit more time about this brand new progressive lens that we fit with a VR headset, So I think that knowing how we also tie those break the script moments and those wow moments, those surprise and delight moments to the patient type is important. I know our time together is kind of coming to an end here. Do you want me to leave you with some pro tips for implementation?
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Samantha. This has been so great. I've taken like pages of notes. I can't wait to talk about this more.
Oh, you're so sweet. Yeah, we could probably talk about this for hours. I think in terms of implementation specific to the optical, refreshing the displays. It's not just about putting the frames up on the board and making sure the demo lenses are clean of fingerprints. It's about, think about the window displays you see when you're walking through big cities and the attention and the beautiful design that goes into that. And people stop and look, what are people going to stop and look at on your boards? Set a budget to that. It doesn't need to be an expensive one. You can get some really cool creative stuff if you've got some crafty people in your practice at the dollar store, right? But refresh it quarterly so that even as patients are coming back or doing checkups, like it looks fresh and new and encourages them to want to stop and see it. I still am obsessed with the idea of the editor's picks, right? So the optician's picks and having curated collections for each optician. I think that's, this month's must-haves. And it gets the optician excited, something to focus on in social media. So it's more than just in the optical. Having some measurable standards that patients should, if the handoff didn't happen in the exam room and the optician brought them up, if it didn't, patients shouldn't be in the optical any longer unattended for 60 seconds max, right? 60 seconds. And tracking capture rate, and not just tracking capture rate as a practice, but I really believe that if a practice wants to continue, as your patient satisfaction goes up, as patients are more and more wowed with experiences, they're going to buy more from you. And I think that as we start to figure out who's doing the best job in delighting patients, not just the capture rate metric as a whole, as a team, but also measuring individual performance is helpful, because then you can start to identify not just it's not a competition, but to identify who's excelling and who could maybe learn, let's figure out what Steve's doing really well that maybe Samantha could learn from or implement some of what he's doing.
There's a ton there, and I do appreciate our time to wrap up here. A couple of things that I'd love to touch on. The point you just made, extremely important. It's not about engendering competition between your teammates. It's about improving your teammates, right? The best athletes, for like easy team example, the best athletes of all time are the ones that are excellent themselves for sure, but elevate their team through their effort. You know, Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player of all time. Sorry, I'm a Chicago boy. LeBron fans, get at me. Uh, Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player of all time, not because he individually is the best, although there's an argument to be made, but he made every single player on his team better because he insisted that we have a winning culture here. That's something that you can engender in your team, and not to the extent that Jordan did. Jordan's got his own problems, but something like it. So there's that, and I think there's one, and we could dive in a little bit deeper if you'll be on again, and I would love that. But one thing that I would say is a wow moment that is not at all difficult, but it does take a little bit of time, is I would get in the habit of calling every single patient 2 weeks after their eyewear is dispensed for a couple of things. One, I want to see how they're going. Hey, we had this conversation. We dispensed this glasses. You could see really well when you left and they fit really well. I want to make sure that that's still the case. I want to make sure that you're still happy. And I want to make sure that if there's anything that we missed, that we can address it for you right now before it becomes too long, right? There's a missed opportunity often where you dispense and then the patient decides that they're unhappy, or they get out of alignment and they can't see anymore, or something happens and they're no longer happy, but they don't want to have that confrontation. But if you call them asking for it, they'll share it with you. And that gives you an opportunity to both fix and exceed their expectations in that moment. It's also an opportunity to check in and say, hey, we were looking at sunglasses when you were here last. Just wanted to check in and see if you wanted to order those now or whatever. But that as a follow-up is an opportunity to wow, because nobody gets phone calls to check in on how things are going. It's, you know, you bought a pair of glasses. That's it. We'll see you in a year or two. But it doesn't have to be like that. It shouldn't be like that in my mind.
The practices that really stand out are the ones that are taking the time to pause and designing the experiences that their patients can't stop talking about.
I love that. What a great line to end on. Samantha, thank you so much for your time and your insights. For those of you listening, or for those listening, how would they get in touch with you and learn more about InnerReactive?
I would love to speak to anybody who wants to talk more about how they can implement and create more surprise and delight moments in their practice. And they can get a hold of me at samantha.toth@innerreactive.com.
Thank you once again, Samantha. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Best Practices. I've been Steve Alexander. I'm head of growth at Anagram. Thank you so much.